Ready?
Ready.
Yvonne, you're muted.
Who's muted?
Thank you for joining today's Cornerstone Chat.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Smith, the Executive Director of Cornerstone Community Development Corporation. Thank you for joining us today for the second of a series of discussions as part of Cornerstone CDC's Healing Illinois program. Healing Illinois is a state-funded program which strives to address racial inequality and social unrest in a meaningful and productive way. Healing Illinois goals are to promote dialogue by facilitating conversations that build connections and understanding across the state. It also wants to encourage collaboration by connecting and engaging in racial healing activities and facilitate learning about this crucial topic. I'm very excited about today's panel discussion with Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., Ms. Yvonne M, and Mr. Leonard Noble. I hope you will enjoy this as well. I now turn the discussion over to today's moderator, Mr. Camille Walton, Deputy Director of Cornerstone CDC.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for taking time this morning so that we can have this discussion, and I hope everyone chimes in and give us some great questions for Q&A and possible feedback. To get started this morning, I wanted to pose a question to the group. Currently, what type of social problems do you work on, and why do you think they're important? Anyone can start.
I'll initiate. We've been approached. I say we are the organization that I'm honored to chair, the Black Panther Party Cubs, and many people have said incorrect narrative has been brought to us on a number of occasions that they were such as, well, Chairman Fred, we see you address the issues with the police attacking our people. What about the situation on the ground in the community with our people referred to as black on black crime? We attempt to put our ear to the ground in a sense and see what's the contradiction. For example, is to see what's phenomenal. Talk the language of the people. For example, we know that hip hop, or the rap is phenomenal with the youngsters in particular. We have in the vicinity of the Hampton House, the home was Chairman Fred Hampton grew up in. We're working on the studio, and while we're working on it, we still been utilizing it. One case in particular, situation in mind sticks out. There was this group of youngsters known as the Woods Finest who had some internal situations going on, quote unquote beef amongst each other, and we attempt to up the ante with not just a conversation, but we attempt to wed or marry theory and practice. We had called for them to come to utilize the studio to do one of their upcoming songs, and it addressed some of the issues. One of their colleagues, one of their friends they grew up with was locked up. So we said, okay, we're going to go down to the infamous Cook County Jail, and we actually met people who were fortunate and unfortunate to meet some brothers and sisters who were just being released. And we tied that in with the video of the song. So it was a reciprocal relationship. They got to learn information what was going on inside the county jail. Also, they took their talents and tied into the song they did about some of the issues. So we try to we attempt to turn the communities in the classroom where everyone benefits from the information, because the Black Panther Party position was that information is raw material for new ideas. So that's just one example we refer to as the code of culture. Well, we just again we assess what's phenomenal. We have what we also call the educational ethic, where we up the ante with schools, universities, what have you. So they say make it a class project to work on cases of political prisoners. Make it a class project to work on conditions and issues within our community. Again, in attempts to wed or marry theory and practice.
Thank you. Perfect. Ms. Orr?
Well, my activism comes through my voice, more so through carrying on the legacy of my parents. My mother, Christina Chuckles May, was a high-ranking officer in the Illinois Black Panther Party. My father also a ranking officer and a political prisoner of 42 years from the infamous Move 9, the Move organization. And so it's basically in my bloodline. And for me, I carry forth my activism by my community service work through my nonprofit and working in tandem with other organizations like Cornerstone. My thanks to Cornerstone, Southland Recovery Coalition. And it happens with just making sure that you can use your voice, knowing how to exert yourself and how to insert yourself in the fabric of social injustice and racial discord, and making sure that I lead also by example with mentoring youth and helping them to control their anger in a way that is beneficial to the community, and helping them to galvanize. As a certified community organizer, that's paramount to me. I know Leonard and Chairman Fred both longtime community activists and community organizers. I think the community organizing is at the key of us coming together to help dispel and eradicate racism in this country.
Perfect. And Mr. Noble, I posed the question to you, the same question on the what social problems are you currently working on to help with this effort of healing Illinois, and why do you think it's important?
Working on the economic disparity. And primarily what I do that is to work with workforce development, stuff that we're doing right here at the agency, and trying to promote entrepreneurship opposed to preparing people to attempt to go to work for someone else who may or may not have a desire to hire them, to give them skill sets so that they can go to work for themselves and become business people themselves, better allowing them to hire people that they want to hire, as well as to take those dollars that they earn in profits and support organizations like Cub and Cornerstone and so forth.
Thank you, guys. Next question, and this one is posed to Mr. Noble. We all know that the shooting of unarmed Black men has been going on for decades. It's a lot more visual now that everyone is walking around with a cell phone in their pocket and we're able to see it a lot more visually. Why do you think the civil rights movement didn't stop the unarmed shooting of Black men and women and racial profiling?
That's a good question, K-Mill. That's a real good question. I think because there's too much money in controlling one segment of the population, primarily through fear, which is what is happening with the killings. And you would keep people off balance, and therefore they don't have the time to do the things like better educate themselves, be more involved in the community, creating a better household structure for themselves and their families, because they're thrown off balance with constantly being afraid that every time the police pull up behind them or a situation like that occur, they may wind up being a victim. I think that's really one of the driving forces.
Thank you. Thank you. Chairman, several people who have seen the movie Judas and the Black Messiah and who were not familiar with your father's story were shocked at how young your father and the organization's members were. I mean, we're talking teens and, very young Black men and women. What do you think is needed to motivate our young men and women of today to get engaged to influence political and economic change?
There are a number of ingredients to see that overall revolutionary recipe represented. You have to take into context during the Black Power movement of the '60s, that climate where conversations or discussions, people were forced to face some real realities. Terms such as the draft, which it was common discussion about with the quote unquote options in many cases for many people were to either go fight for this country or go to jail. Conversations of acknowledging political prisoners. Conversations and acknowledging the role the police played within our communities. There was a shaking up of what we refer to as the class peace. In other words, kind of like the mantra that Alcoholics Anonymous says, the first step in addressing the problem is recognizing that we have a problem. That's a major a position that has to be taken to come to grips. And we in the climate, right, as we presently speak. In fact, we say the climate of the coronavirus is like capitalism on steroids, where we acknowledge we have to, though we've been dealing with death on a daily basis prior to this climate, but we see it now. We have to acknowledge it. And the next logical question is, okay, how do we deal with it? Kind of like to paraphrase the poem by Claude McKay: "If we must die, how do we die as dogs being led to slaughter?" So that in particular is a necessary ingredient to come to grips with the brutal reality of our situation, and not look at it from a pessimistic point of view, but to acknowledge that there was a track record of resistance, and that we are our own liberators.
Miss Orr, same question. What do you think is needed to kind of get our youth and young men engaged and more involved in politics and making change?
Well, I'll lead with having my aunts are on here. Sister Janet Africa, Sister Janine Africa, I salute you, I love you, on the move. As part of the Move 9 and what those two women in particular had to go through with the other women. Most people don't know that history. Most people are unaware of who the Move organization is, who the Move 9 is. They're unaware that we experienced domestic terrorism firsthand when they dropped the bomb on our family and 11 men and women and children murdered as they're trying to escape a flaming house that lit up a whole entire neighborhood. And so the key point is to, I think, that we need to know our history. It's very important and necessary that we teach our young people the importance of where we've come from beyond the civil rights movement, beyond Martin and Malcolm. It seems like that's all we talk about in schools is Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, rather, and Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. And if we don't know where we've come from in our entirety, and we are so much more than just a few segments. A lot of times during Black History Month, what I do is to teach classes on Black inventors, men and women that are the key elements of a lot of what we use today, including technology and social media. And so for me to get them involved, you have to inform, you have to educate. That's first and foremost. And our history, our colorful history, you're not going to find that type of history in a school book. It's not talked about.
I was blessed to be educated outside of that, so I totally agree. Mr. Noble, anything you want to add, or I'll go on to the next one, but I'll definitely like your feedback on that question. How can we get young people more involved?
I think by example. I think when young people see adults step up to the plate and do what's appropriate, what's right as it relates to their best interest, and you create some tangible outcomes, then the youth will begin to take their rightful position and follow the adults. But unfortunately, in current times, a lot of the adults have failed the children.
Okay, thank you guys for all your input on that question there. Mrs. Orr, I know you spoke a little bit about your organization and what you do, but can you elaborate a little more on what you're doing to help promote racial healing and healing in Illinois? You're muted. I can't hear you. Can you do it?
I have a lot of certifications that I won't completely go through, but as a community organizer, as a peer recovery specialist, as a life coach, I take pride in working with community leaders, community advocates to rally and come together to use our voice collectively. What we will do is stand against laws that no longer and never have, frankly, benefited us. We write to our politicians. I did so much writing over the 40 plus years that the Move 9 was in jail. I'm very astute at legalese and how to bring pressure on the elected officials that we have elected to do exactly what they pledged to do when they were on the campaign trail. I've done labor work under the esteemed late Reverend Dr. Addie Wyatt, one of the premier women labor union advocates in the country. Same with Willie Taplin Barrow. A lot of work with the Rainbow Push Coalition, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. And so that work that I learned going through industrial area foundations, using the Saul Alinsky principle of organizing, I carry it forth in all the work that I do, whether it be with the for-profits or nonprofits. Since the pandemic hit, and we had this, eruption across the world with the murder of George Floyd, I actually worked with a lot of corporations where I was surprised that it was so difficult for them to come up with a statement to denounce racism. Some companies that I had worked with for over 15 years, yet never having established some type of stance against how people are treated, but they have an anti-discrimination clause built into their hiring practices that's not followed. So a lot of work, in that arena as well, and getting youth to understand what that work looks like when it's the outcome that you're looking for, and also when it's not the outcome that you're looking for. Muted yourself, Mr. Walton.
I apologize for that. I will try to keep more use you. Yeah. Does anyone else want to chime in on or have any feedback on how their work is helping to promote racial healing in Illinois?
Chairman Fred?
Is it my phone with the static? Is it just me?
Yes, sir, it's you.
Yeah, is it just my phone with the static? Is it just me with the static, the background noise? Is it me?
Yes, it is.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but it is static. So
Yeah.
you can come out and come back in and try to not move around so much.
Okay.
Awesome. While we're waiting on Chairman Fred to join us back, everyone kind of be patient with us. This is technology, but I'm sure everyone dealt with it all 2020 with Zoom meetings and online schooling. So this is nothing new for any of us. We hope to have him join us right back here pretty quickly. Until then, I'll kind of move on to the next question, and maybe he can chime in when he joins back. What inspired you to work for social change, and what are some of the problems you face in your current work? And that question is for the group.
I yield to Brother Noble.
Well, I think that as I grew up being exposed to, I was born in 1960, and that was a time of a lot of civil rights activities. Dr. King, Malcolm X, Chairman Fred Hampton with the Black Panther Party, etc. And so I kind of grew up around that period of time, and it just resonated with me. And then as an adult, looking and seeing all the injustices and so forth that was taking place and going on, as an intelligent person, you would want to be a part of hopefully the solution. And that's been a long, ongoing process, still even to right now.
Welcome back, Chairman Fred. You're muted, but there you go.
All right. Okay. I lost the last question.
But that's okay. I'm going to bring it back around to you. But you sound a lot clearer and a much better connection. So, but the question is, and it's pretty much an obvious question for you, but what inspired you to work for social change? Obviously, it's in your DNA. But what are some of the current problems you're currently seeing in your work?
Unfortunately, a lot of I mean, as you just mentioned, in my DNA, but unfortunately, some of the same conditions, situations that the coffin don't cut from have to deal with, range from that of political prisoners, miseducation in our schools. Though in many cases, though, as the old axiom goes, things stay the same or the names have changed. Unfortunately, I grew up in a city that in many cases the name's not even changed.
Yeah.
The name's not even changed. I'm forgive me, y'all. I'm trying to get in the right space. Okay.
Right. I will take this opportunity to note that no matter who you are, no matter how historical your lineage is, depending on where you are, because we both still live, we all live in urban communities. This is a prime example of the bandwidth, the towers, the internet incapabilities that we have in minority communities across the country. And as you can see, it is not just specific to, as they say, po folks, it is specific to a lockout, a shutdown of having the same opportunities afforded to us as a race of people, a nation of people, that others do. And so for suburban areas, they do not have the same issues in their households as their children have had to pivot with the rest of the country and the world to go online and be able to matriculate through their studies. And though it is not necessarily a direct tie to racial healing, having opportunities like large corporations, Comcast, Rise, Xfinity, all of them come together to try to work with agencies like Cornerstone Community Development Corporation to be able to bring internet services in a wider bandwidth meaning we won't have this sketchy connection like what Chairman Fred is experiencing because he chooses to live in the community that he grew up in, that his father was unfortunately murdered in. But things like grocery stores and food deserts, things that we were fighting for when we were segregated and had our own businesses on a larger scale, we have to fight even harder for those things. So it's not lost on me that we are having these technical difficulties. And it's not due to the software or the moderator, it's due to the internet connection services, the opportunities that our children have to be successful. We have to send them outside of our neighborhoods to schools that have computer labs. We have to send them outside of our neighborhoods for fresh produce. We send them outside of our neighborhood for access to resources and different cultural arts programs. At one point in time, racial healing will be at its precipice of maybe possibly occurring when we can have in our own communities, in our own neighborhoods, the same types of day-to-day life necessities that are afforded and naturally given to other communities. I'll recall that we lost a large big box. Everybody has their issues with, stores like Walmart. But Walmart was a necessary store, a wonderful place for an urban community, and decided to remove themselves. We've had several Walgreens that could not withstand the riots that occurred after yet another Black man had been murdered. And we've had 27 Black men and women murdered since George Floyd. 27. And that's the ones that are posted in the news. I am pretty sure there are plenty more of them as well. And so for me, I've moved beyond carrying a poster sign and marching in the streets. I don't have it in me anymore. And it's because of what my mom and my dad went through. But what I do have is, because of them, an education, because I'm raised to assimilate, to infiltrate, to put pressure on the corporations, the money makers, to give us free by way of giving us opportunities that we rightfully deserve, that we've been just as equally educated for, and that we are, apt to be able to do. At what point does us fighting within our workplaces end, us fighting within our neighborhood for police protection versus police brutality end, and so that's the advocacy and activism that I'm looking for from the next generation.
Gotcha. All right, let me move the conversation along. And hopefully Chairman will join us back in here shortly. Mr. Noble, what organizations and individuals are you interacting with in the school or community? I know you're heavily engaged in a lot of different workforce development fields and with a lot of union members and things. Who are some of those organizations and individuals that you're currently interacting with?
That's a good question, Camille. I was actually in a meeting on yesterday with some local business owners, as well as an international business owner and a national chain. And we were talking about how, and everybody at the table was of another ethnic group for the exception of myself. And the conversation was about how they were going to help, particularly small Black business owners. And so the one gentleman was talking, and I said, well, how are you going to help a African-American construction company when the contractor may have not had a project of any size in the last 3 or 4 years? Therefore, he doesn't have any cash reserves. He doesn't have any labor force because the people can't just sit around waiting for him to potentially get a contract in another year or two when they got bills every day, so forth and so on. I say, so just awarding me a contract and I don't have the infrastructure that all my competition has, how does that really ultimately benefit me? It does, looks well for you when you're bidding a government project to say you have this participation, but then in the end, I can't really win, and you wind up removing me off the job, bringing in someone else. It looks like you had participation. You say you put forth an effort, but the end result is nil. You've got to level the playing field by bringing the bank to the table that's going to give me the loan. You got to bring the supplier to the table who's going to give me the necessary supplies, because I've been since 300-400 years ago. And unless we having that type of realistic discussion, everything else is a moot point. We talk about, at least I know I do a lot about pass-through contractors, which are fronts. They're not really African. They're African-owned companies legally on paper, but they're not really running and controlling their day-to-day operations with their companies. So that doesn't benefit me to see a pass-through company be awarded a contract, because they're not going to hire Black subcontractors. They're not going to hire Black tradespeople. That money's not going to come back to the Black community. That's kind of like the Oprah Winfrey's and Michael Jordan's of society. Michael Jordan may be a billionaire, but how does that help me? How does that help people in our communities? Is Michael Jordan buying his supplies from the local Black business owner? Is he buying his cars from a Black dealership? Is he buying his fuel from Black service stations, et cetera, et cetera? Probably not. However, we also have pass-through clergy. You got Black faces, but they're representing the interests of someone other than the community. You got passed through politicians. They're in office, but they don't represent their community and benefit the people who put them there simply because of the fact that they were African American. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
That answered a lot. But thank you so much. Chairman Fred, welcome back. Looks like you're at a more dedicated workstation now, so I think we should have a stronger connection.
Right.
Just to kind of bring you back into the conversation and what we were just discussing, what are some of the organizations and individuals are you currently interacting with in regards to schools and community right now?
Well, I'll be remiss not to mention I'm honored and humbled as we speak. The Cornerstone, Finance of a Coalition, as ironic. What other organizations we've been working with as we speak? In our line of work, a lot of times we assess the situation. Because in fact, some people have asked me before how many members we have in our organization. I say, well, a lot of times it depends on how many people the police have murdered. Because we understand that people get involved in struggle, become quote unquote conscious one of three ways: inspiration, aspiration, or desperation. So we have we going fishing kind of like with a net approach. So it varies on our coalition work. You know, so again, we do issues ranging from police terrorism, miseducation in our schools, and political prisoners. So in general, again, I'll be remiss not to mention Cornerstone, move family. With that, let me just say for the record, that's a consistent relationship. Well, these are consistent relationships. But the CRC, Community Ready Course, Oakland, California. The Dr. UEP Newman Foundation, based in Oakland, California. And again, forgive me. I know I hate to name names. I know I'm missing a lot of individuals. But this is a time right now. It's terrible, but it's fine. I say that because with the attacks we subjected to, also sets the stage for climate change. For us to build more principal coalitions and relationships. So it's ever developing as we speak.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Hampton House and kind of go into a little bit more detail about where you currently are, what you're working on, and the programs you guys are building? Yes,
indeed. Hampton House is actually the childhood home of Chairman Fred Hampton, home in which he grew up in. The elementary school he attended, Irving Elementary School, is right across the street. In fact, one of our mottos with this is bigger than the building, more significant than the structure. And actual, we like walking distance, several feet away from the location which he was given the infamous ice cream truck robbery case, which the state alleged that Chairman Fred supposed to $71 for ice cream and gave it to the children. And which in his defense, he said, even though they may have to be a thief, they may have to be a robber, it's given to the people. It's also down about 7 to 8 blocks away from the high school in the Proviso East. So I'm saying all that to put in context about not just the location that Hampton House, which is at 804 South 17th Avenue, Maywood, Illinois, but out the surrounding area. And we thought there was an issue. We thought there was an issue that children in that residing neighborhood, schools in particular, not familiar with the history of Chairman Fred. Since we've been there, people have opened their doors and brought in articles of old photographs, their memories of Chairman Fred Hampton. We have found old clothing, so we have processed it to a museum and a community resource center. We were faced with the house being foreclosed, and the people have continue to come with support. Make sure that community anchored, that the location stays there. And some of the quote-unquote war stories that we've been fortunate to hear about. Came by the house a few months back, and she talked about how she attended grammar school with Chairman Fred, and she remembered him fighting for a swimming pool facility for Black children in the residing area. So As I said earlier, the position of Black Panther Party was information is raw material for new ideas. So it's also a joke before the climate of coronavirus. The children at the school didn't know about Chairman Fred. After educating them, criticizing them about it, there was jokes made. They had to get bigger shirt sizes. They walk with their chest up. So just hearing about the history of that. We have an ongoing campaign to say the Hampton House. But we're not waiting until we get it back up to code to start our work. We have our program, Triple C, Community Club, and the Spirit of Black Panther Party Freedom Program. We had the studio work. We had a Freedom on Radio hosted by myself, Lady Rage, every Wednesday, right there at the Hampton House. It was ongoing, and we initially had shut we closed GoFundMe fundraising campaign. We reopened it back on February 21st because the people said they want to continue to support not only the saving, but also the maintaining and the ongoing work at the Hampton House, which is at GoFundMe.com/Save the Hampton House 51.
You muted, Mr. K-Mill.
I apologize. Thank you so much, Chairman, and I'll make sure that on our Cornerstone Community Development website, we'll post links so that people can find out more about how they can help and support the Hampton House.
Okay,
yes, sir.
To that point, and this is kind of what I've been talking about. Now, we just are coming out of Black History Month, right? And you've had, at least I know I've seen a lot of things in the media, the major networks, some of the largest retailers, all of them talking about this whole thing about Black history. But I haven't heard or seen any of them talking about preserving that history. You understand? I haven't heard anybody in the media talking about Harold Washington. He was the mayor of the city. I haven't heard them talking about Maynard Jackson and all the things that he did when he was the mayor in Atlanta, when it came to contracts and creating equity for those Black contractors back there. You know, so my point being is the people that they're, because it's their narrative that they're promoting and feeding to us, if we feed into that, does any actual progress get made? Probably not. What we get caught up in is symbolism with no substance. We have to embrace and support institutions like Cornerstone, like the Chairman Fred Hampton House, because those are the places where our children will find out the true historical facts about their history and their potential and their ability to do things moving forward in this world.
That is a great segment. Yvonne, do you have anything to add before I kind of pivot a little? But not really. It's not really a pivot, but more of a general question saying, you know, and kind of feeding off what Mr. Noble's saying is, how do we educate the public? You know, how do we go about educating and making sure that people are aware of not only the issues, but the programs and opportunities that are available?
I will just say something very quickly, which is Brother Noble's words really resonated with me. Goes back from the 70s all the way to today. If we as a people could just not get caught up in the symbolism with no substance, we can move this entire country forward. We can do that. If we built this country, you know, our forefathers, foremothers, if we have been withstanding being murdered for the entire time that we have been here, from lynchings to being dragged by trucks of drunken white males, to being bombed out of our own homes, to being shot down in our backs in the middle of a street unarmed, then certainly if we could just not get caught up in the shiny thing, you know, the materialistic capitalism that we fall prey to, the billions of dollars that we give to large corporations rather than recirculating the dollars in our own communities, if we could shift our mindset and detract from being caught up in symbolism with no substance, we can heal thyself.
And K Mel, just a final point on that. I'll show you a classic example that just happened last week. You had an incident where the Chicago police raided the wrong house, paraded an African American woman in the nude for a prolonged period of time, almost an hour, totally unnecessarily. And she's now suing the taxpayers, like all the rest of them do, and rightfully so. And one of the key things that she's did that's good is she's also civilly suing the individual officers. But here's the point. Murder rate in Chicago through the roof. This is what the media and the city government says. You can't even drive on the expressway in Chicago. Just last week you had 4 shootings on the interstate. Carjackings through the roof. But now you take the COVID money, you take the CARES Act money, and you reward those same officers who are most of the cases making more than $100,000 a year today, and give them $281 million of the people's money that could have been going towards the homeless folks, the schools you close, the medical facilities you close, the mental health centers you close, but instead you reward the people that's victimizing the everyday folk.
Exactly. I was going to chime in, but I'm the moderator, so I'm going to keep the conversation going. We all kind of work on the front lines in different ways, trying to make a change in our communities. I was inspired as a child by my predecessors, from Fred Hampton to Marcus Garvey, Booker T, Frederick Douglass. I study my ancestors, trying to figure out how I can make a change. However, I never really saw myself as an activist. My question is do you consider yourself an activist, and can anyone be an activist? And that's to the group.
Chairman.
Okay, I was scared. I was hesitating. I thought I was breaking up. My background was breaking up. But to myself, it takes a certain amount of humility to address issues that in some cases may not directly impact you. As I said earlier, people get involved in struggle, become conscious. One of 3 ways: inspiration, aspiration, or desperation. In many cases, a lot of times people respond to what we refer to as they take on the Spreewell effect. I'm referencing Spreewell, who played for the New York Knicks, where the coach had addressed him, and it was some sort of racist issue that happened. He dealt with it because it impacted him, and I respect that. However, to be able to put your ear to the ground and address issues that may not directly impact you, let the record reflect there are many people who escaped from chattel slavery. That commitment of forces such as Harriet Tubman to go back for that sacrifice, it's a different dynamic. That this system sees the extra quote unquote crime. Against one thing, do things as individual, and speak out for others. That's something. And in fact, I talk about, like, even in regards to movies. One of the few movies I've ever seen that show our people fighting back or addressing chattel slavery, not in a reactionary way, not in a subjective way. It was a movie, ironically called Book of Negroes. I remember initially I said I don't want to watch this, even with the title of it, but it actually showed black men and black women in tandem. It showed them fighting. It showed them a situation where they themselves had gained their quote unquote freedom, and however they seen Africans were being kidnapped, they intervened. So that's an extra ingredient to be able to take a position to speak out for others. Understand, either you or yourself in a situation is quote unquote well to do. I'm doing an interview right now, brother. I'll meet you right back about 15 minutes.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Noble, do you consider yourself an activist? And if so, or what is an activist to you?
I think that an activist is anyone who wants to see justice, anybody who wants for themselves what they want for their brother, their sister, what you were taught as a child about the golden rule. And an activist is anyone who will demand accountability from themselves, but also demand accountability from those who are around them.
And it looks like we have a question from the comments here, which I'll get to shortly. It says, I'm reminded of Malcolm X's response to the Caucasian woman who asks how she or white people can help support. What are your thoughts on how well-mannered or well-meaning and sincere non-Black organizations peoples can do with our organizations to help? So basically, yeah, what are your thoughts on non-Black organizations and how sincere their efforts are to really help make an impact or change for Black and brown communities? Chairman, unmute yourself first, but I definitely would like your input. There you go.
Yes. I think the Black community in particular, we cannot afford the quote-unquote luxury to have this minimizing people's how people engage with it, whether it be on someone so and so forth. I do get a relationship with Chairman Fred said the revolution is a scientific art that must be perfected. Again, a scientific art that must be perfected. Because we have our situation, I think in so many cases it's devalued. Whether people have intentions or what have you, to look at such examples, even with entities such as U.S. imperialism, even their coalitions are not whether whether they like each other, whatever, common interests in different times. You can assess, okay, with the U.S. and France, they're together on this situation. They have a common interest. So I think it's important that we make one. We also, I'm a realist, not racist. However, recognize that which role people play. I'm saying again, and it's not to be egotistical, but again, place a structure and a scientific analysis. Okay, these are different points of unity people can have without compromising that entity that we're fighting for, and that being self-determination, the right to determine the destiny of our communities, in which in some cases, in many cases, those who present themselves as allies may come in and compromise that. We have a slogan with us. We say no retreat, no route, and that position is reciprocal. We also maintain that we engage in coalition with other forces. Say, for example, when we engage down to North Dakota, indigenous community, native community, to challenge the pipelines, we went and respecting their position about self-determination because they have to handle the brunt of that. So we respect that. When we come in, again, it's a coalition force. Because in the St. Hampton House is a coalition force. So that position, we expect it also when forces come along and say, how can they assist, how can they aid? They must respect the fact that our leadership, and also we're fighting this into self-determination. It's not to be compromised in the battle of challenging an entity that's deprived us of that. So even allied forces cannot deprive us of that. As you say, even with self-determination, even our mistakes are ours. So we cannot compromise that.
And so before we kind of go into any Q&A or any other questions, is there anything else anyone wanted to add to our discussion on what we talked about?
For me, as far as racial healing goes, we've been talking about racial healing for Illinois. I know that conversation itself is being sponsored in part by Healing Illinois and the Illinois Department of Human Services. However, there's a quote that you all have at the bottom from Fred Hampton that says, we're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. And I really think that when it comes to non-Black organizations, non-Black people, like Malcolm X at that particular time, before he had traveled to make his homage and became Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, I think that it's not so much about extracting ethnicity as it is about just help. You know, this whole country's mindset around affirmative action, it's not that we had to have it because we were doing our own thing, but you bombed us in Oklahoma,
Right.
bombed us in Philadelphia. We were learning how to grow and sustain ourselves with our own food. We were craftsmen, craftswomen, tailors, doctors, attorneys working in our own community. And this is not to say that, desegregation was the worst thing in the world. But for me, in my experience personally, the only time that my family has been able to flourish has been to do it for themselves. I come from 5 generations of entrepreneurs. And I come from 5 generations of entrepreneurs on both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, because they were not afforded opportunities from non-Black organizations. To this day, I work for myself. I have my own consulting firm. I run a nonprofit organization because the very companies that I used to write federal contracts for and get them tens of millions of dollars. The very city that we live in, city of Chicago, when I fought and wrote for weeks to get us 56 million so we could take over foreclosed homes and return them back to the community, what we know as the neighborhood stabilization program, that's my writing, that's my brain. And not to boast, I do not see where all of those hundreds of homes within our own urban communities were returned for us to be able to move in. Instead, what was done with that money that I feel we got duped as a community, they turned them into luxury housing. What was done with that money, they waved the carrot of a public housing voucher and shipped us out from our community, our connectivity into suburban areas without access to resources, public transportation, all that we knew. And so urban is not poor. It's not a poor mindset. It's not a poverty-driven type of thing. And we really, there's a movie / documentary out called Amend. It talks about the 14th Amendment. Very great, thing that I think everyone should check out. Equally American Skin. It sobers you up so quickly to know that despite all that we're all collectively striving for, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the corporation's base, we will not be able to achieve the American dream in the manner that we were taught growing up. It's going to have to come differently, and it doesn't only have to come through entertainment or sports industry. And so we need to be solidified and have unity in what we want for our people, for our communities, and our own neighborhoods.
Yeah. Speaking of what you said about Brother Malcolm, a lot of people aren't aware that after his pilgrimage to Mecca, his entire dialect and tone changed, and he was no longer fighting for civil rights, fighting for human rights, and he thought human rights was the mission. And he wanted to take the United States to the United States to court at the United Nations and charge them with violation of human rights, because he felt that it wasn't about color, race anymore, and it was about more healing and collectiveness and solidarity. Mr. Noble, anything you wanted to add to that before we moved on?
Well, it's just the fact that you got to always remember, a lot of times it's the same game played, they just tweak. So back during slavery, they would sell off the family members that way. The children go to this plantation, the father go to that plantation. Later, they went to a point when you had public housing. They said, well, listen, in order for you to receive food subsidy and public housing, you can't have a man living in the household. Then they later tweaked it, and then they start with the mass incarceration and locking up all the fathers and mothers as well, and separating the family that way. The thing is, they always continue with the same agenda. They just put a spin on it, and oftentimes the public kind of forget, until it's too late, right? The pot, the frog in it, they just keep gradually turning up the temperature. But at the end of the day, you're still gonna be boiled, right? That's the same thing here. So we can't be taken off our square. The key is, if you want to help, do what's right. You don't have to make no declaration to it. Back when Dr. King was marching, they were marching against Bull Connor. They were marching against people like Hoover. Well, Hoover, George Wallace, Bull Connor, they all dead. 50 years ago, when Hanrahan killed Chairman Fred, he's dead. Why is the plight of Black people worse in 2021 if we got all these good meaning people trying to help Black folk?
I got a comment here from the feedback. Mr. Ramesses Hardy states that it definitely starts with classism first. Classism is the oldest form of discrimination, even before racism. And the poor would eventually eat the rich, though. And he has a great point. Breaking people up by social class is far more devastating and keeps people oppressed just as overtly as racism does. Lots of comments, lots of people feeding back just on the topic of non-Black organizations helping us and helping heal. It's gonna take solidarity. We're not gonna fix this with our 13% of the population. We're not gonna make enough change without having outside people and advocacy help. The George Floyd protests was sparked a lot because of how diverse Minnesota was, and that there were people from all colors in those streets marching. And that sustained pressure and that's a solidarity amongst all the different communities of the Twin Cities is really what helped spark that movement and push it along. That it wasn't just Black people out there, that it was just as many white people upset, and Asians, and I spent 10 years in Minnesota, so I know how that community works. But moving on, and we're gonna kind of start getting closer to the end here and wrapping this up. We're moving on 1 hour here. One of the last questions I got here says, what are the ways that young people can take effective action right now for changing our community? We saw in this last election how all the survivors of those school shootings, all those kids were now registered voters. And we saw them make a difference in Florida and in other places where the youth have been dramatically affected by current political and racial divides. What are some other ways that we think that the youth can, young people can take effective action in making change in their community?
I think they're doing it now. I think the use of social media in its most positive form is being used to activate. I think there is a way of the way that they organize that we may not understand, generationally separate from that. But, even when we see this mob action that occurs, in downtown Chicago at different times, that in and of itself is a form of community organizing. And if we were not as tuned out collectively, it's not just young people, it's older adults, it's second chance citizens, where we are so despondent and hurt and pained and disappointed that we delve into substance use, you know, or we support the penal system by committing recidivist acts. I believe that young people are at a point in the history of our country where they actually have the power. And we saw that with all the different factions that you mentioned. So it's really about understanding the Constitution. They're the closest that I know of outside of immigrants that are taking, you know, the United States test to become citizens. They're the closest ones to have read the Constitution to have to graduate from high school, or some of us in grammar school. But many of us don't understand what the Constitution is and means. Even lawmakers, you know, there are some lawmakers. I used to do random corner stops with elected officials like an alderman, and randomly ask them to name one of the amendments, and they could not. But they're an elected official representing me, and they don't know what my rights are, let alone theirs. So the key point is to know your rights. And despite experiences of us being murdered unarmed, if we really knew our rights, we don't even have to let a police officer into our home. Now, it's different in the case of the woman when they just basically broke in her door. And I'll end with this. At a time when I was working for the Chicago Police Department, and I was writing the speeches for Mayor Daley, the superintendent of police, the deputy superintendent, and the CAPS director. I was coming home from a scene of a crime to write it up for news affairs at a stoplight downtown. It's like 3-something in the morning. And so I'm at a red light. My phone slides off of the cradle in my car. I bend down to pick up the phone. I come up. The light is still red, and there are 2 police officers on bikes at my window. And one is banging on the window. I'm startled, and I ask, like, what's going on? And before he can even respond, they break my window and pull me out of my truck onto the ground as other cars are coming up. I am subsequently arrested. I am held without anybody talking to me for 3.5 hours. I don't get my phone call. I'm giving them my number, my rank and file number as a citizen employee of the Chicago Police Department. It is not until what they call a white shirt, a sergeant, comes in and somebody is saying, oh, that B has been talking about, you know, pull up my number, because I went all the way to the top, and not to be messed with, so to speak, but certainly not in that manner. I'm never read my rights. I'm telling them constantly, I work for the police department. They don't believe me. 6.5 hours later, the sergeant lines them up and makes the officers that were on the scene apologize. He tells me they're going to fix my car. They'll send a car to bring me home. They have trouble apologizing, and it's a mix of white and black officers. They have trouble believing that I am who I say I am. At the end, at this time, I had long locks, dreadlocks, as most people call them. They tell me I fit the description of a black male that had just robbed a store. And so, makeup or no makeup, I know I don't look like a black male that has just robbed a store, nor do I, quote unquote, sound like one. And yet, the blue, the force that I worked for at the time, did not believe me. And only when they realized, because of my rank, that they were about to all lose their jobs, and they did I get an apology or the opportunity to make a phone call. When we have a system that is not made for us, young people have to make sure that the systems and laws that are in place for the future are made for all of us, regardless of our class or our color or our quote unquote station in life. And that's what I'm looking for young people to do on behalf of this nation.
Wow. That is a terrible story, and I've never heard that one before, Yvonne. So thank you for sharing with the group. That is all I have. Thank you guys so much for this discussion. I look forward to the next segment in this group, in this series of discussions we're having about healing Illinois. and addressing the racial inequities and divisions. I'll bring back in Ms. Angela Smith, the Executive Director of Cornerstone, for final comments.
Unmute Angela, please.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I'd like to thank the State of Illinois, Healing Illinois Project for this great opportunity to bring this very important conversation to our communities. Thank you, Chairman Fred, Yvonne, and Leonard for a very informative and passionate discussion centered around racial inequality that exists in so many forms. Where it comes to employment, just being an everyday citizen, you're not even safe in your home. Those are compelling stories that unfortunately we may have to deal with at some point in our life. I pray that those situations are limited, that we don't have in the masses. Of course, we know that we're seeing an uptick in some of the violence against people of color with no regard for us as human beings. And so, that's very disturbing to me as well. The discussion today also demonstrates that there is much work to be done to effectuate the change we know is needed within ourselves as well as our communities. So please, please, please stay the course. Stay with us for the rest of our discussions as we move forward. And we really hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and that you will join us again on March 16th for our next presentation. The flyer with all details and a hyperlink to join the discussion will be distributed later today. So please save the date, March 16th, same time. Actually, Yvonne, is it going to be Zoom as opposed to the platform we're on today?
Live. Yeah, it's still Facebook Live from your page.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah. So same time, same channel. Thanks again to all of our guests, and you all have a great day.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank y'all.